Hi, I tell very exciting and horrifying stories to everyone. I suggest you subscribe because I post such stories every day. Story 1. The Letters from Blackthorn Asylum. The arrival of the letters. It began with a letter. Sarah found it tucked beneath her apartment door, addressed to her in looping, elegant handwriting. There was no return address, only a wax seal imprinted with the image of a raven. Intrigued, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of parchment with faded ink that read, "Dear Miss Harper, we regret to inform you that the items from your late relative's estate have been delivered to your residence. These items are to remain with you for safekeeping, as per their final request. Sincerely, Blackthorn Asylum." Sarah's heart sank. She had no living relatives, or so she thought. Blackthorn Asylum was unfamiliar, and the letter felt like a cruel mistake. She almost tossed it out, but curiosity compelled her to keep it. The next day, a wooden crate arrived at her door. It was aged and splintered, its surface covered in strange etchings. Inside were dozens of letters, each addressed to different people, none of whom Sarah recognized. Beneath the letters lay a leather journal, bound tightly with string. The smell of mildew wafted from the crate as she lifted it. At first, she thought about throwing it all away, but something about the journal felt important, as if it had been waiting for her. The journal. That evening, Sarah untied the journal. The cover bore no title, only an engraving of a cracked window. Inside were entries written in shaky handwriting. The author identified himself as Dr. Elias Marlowe, a psychiatrist at Blackthorn Asylum, which had apparently been closed for decades. His entries detailed his work with a patient referred to only as Subject 44. July 3rd, 1903. Subject 44 claims to hear voices in the walls. When left alone, they write letters addressed to people who do not exist. The content is disturbing. Prophecies of death, warnings of betrayal. They insist the letters must be sent, or the events will come true. At first, I humored them, but when I read one of the letters aloud, I began to hear the whispers too. As Sarah read, she felt a creeping unease. She glanced at the pile of letters in the crate and noticed one had slid out. The envelope was addressed to her. She didn't remember seeing it before. The first letter. The letter was brief but chilling. "Sarah Harper, the one who watches is behind your door. Do not open it after midnight." Sarah laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it as a prank. But when midnight came, a soft knock echoed through her apartment. Her breath caught in her throat. She sat frozen, staring at the door. Another knock, louder this time, made her jump. She crept toward the peephole and looked out. No one was there. The warnings. The next day, Sarah delved further into the journal. Dr. Marlowe's entries became more erratic. July 15th, 1903. I have intercepted another letter. This one warned of my impending death, describing in gruesome detail the exact way I would perish. Subject 44 laughed when I confronted them, saying, "You cannot change what is written." Sarah shivered. Her phone buzzed with a message from her best friend, Lisa. It read, "Everything okay? You've been quiet." Sarah typed out a reply, but hesitated. She hadn't told Lisa about the letters, not wanting to sound paranoid. Instead, she changed the subject and asked to meet for coffee the next day. That night, another letter appeared in the crate. This one was addressed to Lisa. "Lisa Monroe, your laughter will cease under the weight of water. Stay away from the rivers." The shadow behind the door. Unable to ignore the warnings, Sarah called Lisa and begged her to avoid any bodies of water. Lisa laughed it off, thinking it was a strange joke. "You've been reading too many ghost stories," she said. The following day, Sarah received a call from Lisa's roommate. Lisa had drowned in the nearby river, where she had gone jogging that morning. The guilt was crushing. Sarah tore through the crate, opening letter after letter, desperate for answers. Each one detailed a different person's fate, eerily specific and impossible to dismiss. The final letter she found was addressed to Dr. Marlowe. Dr. Marlowe's final entry. The last journal entry was scribbled in frantic handwriting. August 1st, 1903. I understand now. The letters are not warnings. They are instructions. The voices compel us to obey, to fulfill the destinies they describe. I have written my own letter, but it changes nothing. The one who watches is always waiting. As Sarah read, her apartment filled with the sound of faint scratching. It was coming from behind her door. She backed away, heart pounding, as the scratching grew louder. The final letter. Another letter slid from the crate, landing at her feet. It was addressed to her. Sarah Harper, the watcher knows you've seen too much. There is only one way to stop it. Burn the letters. Burn the crate. Do not hesitate. Hands trembling, Sarah gathered the letters and the journal, throwing them into her bathtub. She doused them in lighter fluid and lit a match. The flames roared to life, and the scratching at her door turned into furious pounding. As the crate burned, the sound stopped. The air grew still. Sarah sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. The aftermath. Weeks later, Sarah moved to a new apartment, trying to forget the ordeal. But one morning, she found a package at her door. It was a wooden crate, identical to the one she had burned. The same etchings covered its surface, and inside was another stack of letters. At the top was an envelope addressed to her. Sarah Harper, you cannot escape what is written. Story 2. The email chain. The first email. It all started when Mia's work email dinged with a new message. She glanced at the subject line. You're next. Assuming it was spam, she clicked it anyway, expecting a scam or a phishing attempt. Instead, the email contained a single sentence. Forward this to 5 people, or you'll regret it. Attached was a photo of a dilapidated house, its windows boarded up with a faint shadow visible in one of the top floor panes. There was no sender listed, and the email seemed to originate from nowhere. Mia rolled her eyes. She hated chain emails, but she also knew ignoring them had never actually resulted in misfortune. Laughing it off, she deleted the message and went about her day. The unnerving calls. That evening, Mia's phone rang. The caller ID displayed unknown number. She hesitated but answered, thinking it might be work-related. At first, there was silence. Then came a voice, a low, guttural whisper that sent chills down her spine. Why didn't you forward it? Mia hung up immediately, her heart pounding. Moments later, another call came through. This time, the voice was more insistent. You have 24 hours, or we'll come for you. She threw her phone onto the couch, her mind racing. Was someone playing a prank? But who would go to such lengths? The creeping presence. The next morning, Mia woke to find her laptop open, even though she was sure she'd closed it before bed. On the screen was the same email she had deleted. Only this time, the subject line had changed. You've been warned. The attachment was still there, but when she clicked it, the photo had changed. Now the shadow in the window was more defined. A humanoid figure with glowing eyes staring directly at the camera. Panicked, Mia forwarded the email to 5 random coworkers, hoping to end whatever sick joke this was. But as soon as she hit send, her inbox flooded with bounce-back messages. Delivery failed. Address not found. The office warning. When Mia arrived at work, she noticed her co-worker Andy staring at her. "You got the email, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. "How do you know about it?" Mia demanded. Andy's face was pale. "I got it last month. I thought it was just a stupid chain email, but things started happening. Doors slamming, shadows moving, and the calls." He shuddered. "I forwarded it, but it didn't stop." "What happened?" Mia asked. "I think it wants something, but I don't know what." Before Mia could press him further, Andy's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and went white. "It's them," he whispered, bolting out of the office. That was the last time Mia saw him. The rules change. That night, Mia received another email. This time, it included a list of names, her co-workers, neighbors, and even her childhood friends. At the top was her own name, crossed out. "Remove a name from the list, or we'll remove you." A new attachment showed a close-up of the figure from the house. Its hollow eyes seemed to burn through the screen, and its grin was unnervingly wide. Mia tried to close the email, but her mouse froze. The screen flickered, and her webcam light turned on. Her reflection appeared briefly on the monitor, but something was standing behind her, a shadowy figure with glowing eyes. She spun around, but her apartment was empty. The desperate choice. Mia called her tech-savvy friend Jake, begging him to help. "It's just a virus," he assured her. "I'll run a scan." "Don't worry." Jake arrived with his laptop, but as soon as he plugged it into Mia's computer, his screen went black. The email appeared on his device, and his name was added to the list. "What the hell is this?" he stammered. "I don't know." Mia cried. "It's like it's alive." The screen flickered again, showing a new message. "You have 6 hours." Jake stared at her. "We have to remove someone from the list." Mia shook her head. "I can't. That's insane. Who do we pick?" Jake hesitated, then whispered, "It's them or us." The sacrifice. As the deadline approached, the pressure became unbearable. The screen now displayed a countdown, each second ticking by with deafening finality. Finally, Jake clicked on one of the names, a coworker Mia barely knew, and hit delete. The screen went blank. For a moment, they thought it was over. Then the lights in the apartment went out. A deep, guttural laugh filled the room, followed by the sound of glass shattering. The figure from the photo appeared in the corner, its glowing eyes fixed on Mia. "You think you can cheat me?" it growled. The screen lit up again, showing the name Jake had deleted. Beneath it was a single sentence: "Debt transferred. The fallout." The next morning, Mia tried to call Jake, but his number was disconnected. When she arrived at his apartment, she found the door wide open. Inside, the walls were covered in scratches, and his laptop was smashed on the floor. There was no sign of him. Mia returned home, her nerves frayed. She hoped it was over, but that evening, her phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, "Debt unpaid." The attachment was a photo of her, sitting at her desk, taken only moments earlier. In the background, the glowing-eyed figure loomed closer than ever. The chain continues. Mia disappeared the next day. Her apartment was empty, her belongings untouched. But her email account was still active, sending the same message to random addresses. "You're next." Those who received it didn't know where it came from or why. But for each person who ignored it, the shadows grew darker and the glowing eyes came closer. The chain never ended. It only grew longer. Story 3, The Diary of Ashwood Inn. The Forgotten Inn, The Ashwood Inn was nestled deep in the woods, far from prying eyes and modern conveniences. Once a popular retreat for travelers in the 1800s, it had been abandoned for decades, left to decay in the silence of the forest. But when Emily, a travel blogger with a penchant for forgotten places, stumbled upon its faded sign during a hike, she couldn't resist exploring. The inn was eerily preserved, as though it had been frozen in time. Dust covered the ornate furniture, cobwebs hung in every corner, but the reception desk still held a register with names scrawled in elegant handwriting. On the desk, Emily found an old diary, its leather cover cracked with age. The initials EW were embossed in gold. Intrigued, she tucked it into her bag, intending to read it later. What she didn't know was that taking the diary meant she was bringing something else home with her. The entries begin. That evening, Emily settled into her tiny apartment and opened the diary. The first entry was dated October 3rd, 1887. I am Eleanor Wick, the proprietor of Ashwood Inn. It is my honor to welcome travelers seeking solace and safety in these woods. But not all who come here leave. Emily laughed nervously. It sounded like something out of a Gothic novel. She flipped to the next entry. October 10th, 1887. Another guest has disappeared. Mr. Hargrove claimed to hear whispers in his room, coming from the walls. I assured him it was nothing, but now he is gone. I hear the whispers too. They want something. The hairs on Emily's neck stood on end. She closed the diary, suddenly feeling as though she wasn't alone in her apartment. The scratched out names. Over the next few days, Emily couldn't stop reading. The diary chronicled Eleanor's descent into paranoia. Guests at the inn reported strange phenomena. Mirrors reflecting things that weren't there, furniture moving on its own, and the ever-present whispers. Emily noticed a pattern. Every time a guest vanished, Eleanor would scratch their name out in the register. She flipped back to the register she'd seen at the inn in her photos and realized something chilling. Some of the scratched-out names had been written again, this time in the margins of the diary. One of them was Emily Crawford. The first nightmares. That night, Emily dreamed of the inn. She was standing in the grand dining hall, the chandeliers casting flickering light across the room. The table was set with rotting food, and the chairs were filled with shadowy figures. At the head of the table sat Eleanor Wick, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes fixed on Emily. You took it, Eleanor hissed. You brought them with you. Emily woke with a start, her heart racing. On her bedside table, the diary lay open to a new page. But this entry hadn't been there before. It was written in fresh ink. You cannot escape them, Emily. Return what you took. The haunting escalates. From that night on, strange things began happening. Emily would hear faint whispers when she was alone. Her reflection in the mirror would linger a moment too long, and objects in her apartment moved when she wasn't looking. The diary seemed to follow her. She'd leave it on the bookshelf, only to find it on the kitchen counter or her bed. The entries continued to change. They want to leave the inn, but they cannot. The diary binds them to this world. She must bring it back. Emily tried to throw the diary away, but it reappeared on her nightstand the next morning. Desperate, she burned it in her kitchen sink, watching as the flames consumed the brittle pages. But that night, she found the diary fully intact, waiting for her in the middle of her living room. The guests returned. The whispers grew louder. Emily started seeing shadowy figures in her apartment, tall, faceless shapes that loomed in the corners of her vision. One night, She heard faint footsteps outside her bedroom door. When she opened it, the hallway was empty, but muddy footprints led from her front door to the diary. Another entry had appeared. The guests are coming for her. She must take them home. Emily knew what she had to do. She packed the diary in her backpack and drove back to Ashwood Inn. The inn awakes. The inn was even more foreboding than she remembered. The air inside was thick, and the whispers were deafening now, coming from every corner. She placed the diary back on the reception desk, hoping it would end the nightmare. But as she turned to leave, the front door slammed shut. The chandeliers flickered to life, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. The register opened on its own, and one by one, the scratched-out names appeared on the pages, written in blood. The whispers turned into voices, pleading, angry, desperate. "Why did you leave us? You brought us back. You must stay." Emily turned and saw the shadows from her apartment taking shape. They were the missing guests, their faces hollow and decayed, their eyes filled with rage. At the center of them stood Eleanor, holding the diary. "You belong here now," Eleanor said, her voice cold and final. The final entry. Emily's disappearance made headlines. Hikers found her car abandoned outside Ashwood Inn, but there was no sign of her inside. Only a dusty reception desk, an old register, and a single leather-bound diary left open. The last entry read, "Another guest has arrived. She will never leave." The hikers who found the diary claimed to hear whispers in their dreams. Weeks later, they too vanished, and the diary appeared again, waiting for the next reader to take it home.